Luxor will leave you speechless, known as the world's largest open museum with its museums and rare monuments. One can really discover its historic sites for days together. One can explore the city through a Nile cruise on a traditional boat or hop on a camel or horse and explore the magic of the desert. These are perfect for those in search of relaxation and discovery on their trip in Luxor. The most memorable monument of this region of Egypt is the Luxor Temple. Inscriptions grace the stone walls alongside godlike statues that are illuminated at night. The hieroglyphics depicted on the enormous columns provide an insight into Egypt's rich history. Equally impressive are the ancient burial grounds, the Valley of the Kings. It was here where Howard Carter uncovered King Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. Luxor is the gold mine of ancient Egypt and is home to more famous sites than Giza in the north. Once the capital of Upper Egypt, a name referring to the elevation, not the location. One of the top things to do in Luxor is to pay a visit to the incredible Valley of the Kings. Cruise along the river Nile, get a taste of Egyptian cuisine, and explore the fertile region from above in a hot air balloon ride. Luxor is a city of past and present, tombs and temples, and rich history. Valley of the Kings is a valley in Luxor, Egypt, where for nearly 500 years, from the 16th to 11th century BC, rock-cut tombs were excavated for the pharaohs and the powerful nobles of the new kingdom. The valley stands on the west bank of the Nile, opposite Thebes, modern Luxor, within the heart of the Theban necropolis. The Wadi consists of two valleys, the East Valley and the West Valley. The 18th dynasty pharaohs, however, chose the isolated valley dominated by the pyramid-shaped mountain peaks of Al-Qarn. Their secluded site enclosed by steep cliffs was easy to guard, and when seen from the Theban plain appears to be the site of the setting sun, associated with the afterlife by ancient Egyptians. With the 2005 discovery of a new chamber and the 2008 discovery of two further tomb entrances, the valley is known to contain 63 tombs and chambers. A simple pit, a complex tomb with over 120 chambers, it was the principal burial place of the major royal figures of the Egyptian New Kingdom, as well as number of privileged nobles. The royal tombs are decorated with scenes from Egyptian mythology and give clues as to the belief and funerary practices of the period. Almost all the tombs seem to have been opened and robbed in antiquity, but they still give an idea of the opulence and power of the pharaohs. This area has always attracted the attention of archaeologists and Egyptological explorers since the end of the 18th century, and its tombs and burials continue to stimulate research. Since the 1920s, the valley has been famous for the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamen and is now one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world. In 1979, it became a World Heritage Site along with the rest of the Theban necropolis. Exploration, excavation, and conservation continues in the valley, and a new tourist center has recently been opened. The usual tomb plan consisted of a long inclined rock-cut corridor, descending through one or more halls, mirroring the descending path of the sun god into the underworld to the burial chamber. In the earlier tombs, the corridors turned 90 degrees at least once, such as the tomb of Thutmose IV, and the earlier ones had cottages-shaped burial chambers. This layout is known as bent axis. After the burial, the upper corridors were meant to be filled with rubble and the entrance to the tomb hidden. Later, the layout gradually straightened with an intermediate jog axis. The tomb of Horemheb is an example of this layout and is one of the tombs that is sometimes open to the public. As the tomb's axis straightened, the slopes also lessened. They almost disappeared in the late 20th dynasty. Another feature that is common to most tombs is the well, which may have originated as an actual barrier intended to stop floodwaters from entering the lower parts of the tomb. It seems to have developed a magical purpose later on as a symbolic shaft in the later 20th dynasty. The well itself was sometimes not excavated, but the well room was still present. The majority of the royal tombs were decorated with religious text and images. The early tombs were decorated with scenes from Amduat, that which is in the underworld, which describes the journey of the sun god through the 12 hours of the night. From the time of Horemheb, tombs were decorated with the Book of Gates, which shows the sun god passing through the 12 gates that divided the night time and ensures the tomb owner's own safe passage through the night. These earliest tombs were sparsely decorated, and those of a non-royal nature were totally undecorated. Later, in the 19th dynasty, the Book of Caverns, which divided the underworld into massive caverns containing deities as well as the deceased waiting for the sun to pass through and restore them to life, was placed in the upper parts of the tombs. A complete version appears in the tomb of Ramses VI. The burial of Ramses III saw the Book of the Earth, where the underworld is divided into 4 sections, climaxing in the sun disk being pulled from the earth by Nonet. The ceiling of the burial chambers were decorated with what became formalized as the Book of the Heavens, which again describes the sun's journey through the 12 hours of night. Most of the tombs are not open to the public. 18 of the tombs can be opened, but they are rarely open at the same time, and officials occasionally close those which are open for restoration work. The number of visitors to KV62 has led to a separate charge for entry into the tomb. On the most days of the week, an average of 4,000 to 5,000 tourists visit the main valley. The West Valley is much less visited, as there is only one tomb that is open to the public. Thutmose was the first pharaoh to be buried in the Valley of the Kings. He had decided to hide his tomb from the tomb robbers who had been around for a long while. It was only when the power of monarchy broke down at the end of the Old Kingdom that the afterlife became increasingly accessible to those outside the royal family, and as officials became increasingly independent, they began to opt for burial in their hometowns. Yet the narrow stretches of fertile land that make up much of the Nile Valley generally left little room for grand superstructures. So, as an alternative type of tomb developed, cut tunnel fashion into the cliffs that border the valley and which also proved more resilient against robbery. Most were built on the west side of the river, the traditional place of burial where the sun was seen to sink down into the underworld each evening. Up a small wadi near the main entrance is the small unfinished tomb of Ramses VII, only 44.3 meter long, short for a royal tomb because of Ramses' sudden death. It consists of a corridor, a burial chamber, and an unfinished third chamber. His architects hastily widened what was to have been the tomb's second corridor, making it a burial chamber, and the pharaoh was laid to rest in a pit covered with a sarcophagus lid. Niche of canopic jars are carved into the pit's sides, a feature unique to this tomb. Walls on the corridors leading to the chamber are decorated with fairly well preserved excerpts from the Book of Caverns and the opening of the mouth ritual, while the burial chamber is decorated with passage from the Book of the Earth, although it has only recently reopened to the public. This is the second tomb on the right as you enter the Valley of the Kings. Its whereabouts were already known, as is evident from the graffiti on the walls, dating back to 278 BC. Ramses IV died before the tomb was completed, and its pillared hall had to be hastily turned into a burial chamber. The paintings in the burial chamber are decorated. There is a wonderful image of the goddess Nut stretched across the blue ceiling, and it is the only tomb in the valley to contain the text of the Book of Nut, with a description of the daily path taken by the sun every day. The red granite sarcophagus, though empty, is one of the largest in the valley. The discovery of an ancient plan of the tomb on papyrus shows the sarcophagus was originally enclosed by 4 large shrines, similar to those in Tutankhamen's tomb. Following the robbery of the tomb in antiquity, the mummy of Ramses IV was one of those reburied in the tomb of Amenhotep and is now in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The intactness of Tutankhamun's tomb is due to the existence of the tomb of Ramses VI. Tons of rock chipping thrown outside during its construction completely covered the tomb of Tutankhamun. The tomb was actually started for the ephemeral Ramses V and continued by Ramses VI, with both pharaohs apparently buried here. The names and the title of Ramses V still appears in the first half of the tomb. Following the tomb's ransacking a mere 20 years after burial, the mummies of both Ramses V and Ramses six were moved to Amenhotep tomb, where they were found in 1898 and taken to Cairo. Although the tomb's plastering was not finished, its fine decoration is well preserved, with an emphasis on astronomical scenes and text. Extracts from the Book of Gates and the Book of Caverns cover the entrance corridor. These continue into the midsection of the tomb and well room with the addition of the Book of the Heavens. Nearer the burial chamber, the walls are decorated with extracts from the Book of Amduat. The burial chamber is beautifully decorated with a superb double image of Nut framing the books of the day and of the night on the ceiling. This nocturnal landscape in black and gold shows the sky goddess swallowing the sun each evening to give birth to it each morning in an endless cycle of new life designed to revive the souls of the dead pharaohs. The walls of the chambers are filled with fine images of Ramses VI with various deities as well as scenes from the Book of the Earth, with scenes that show the sun god's progress through the night, the gods who help him, and the forces of darkness trying to stop him reaching the dawn. Look out for the decapitated, kneeling figures of the sun god's enemies around the bases of the chamber's wall and the black colored executioners who turn the decapitated bodies upside down to render them as helpless as possible. On the beautifully decorated right wall of the burial chamber, also try to pick out the figure. The lines and the symbols surrounding him represent a water clock. Ramesses III, the last of Egypt's warrior pharaohs, built one of the longest tombs in the Valley of the Kings. The tomb, started but abandoned by Setnakht, is 125 meters long, much of it still beautifully decorated with colorful painted sunken reliefs featuring the traditional ritual text and Ramesses before the gods. Unusually, here are the secular scenes in the small side rooms of the entrance corridor, showing foreign tribute such as highly detailed pottery imported from the Aegean, the royal armory, boats, and in the last of these side chambers, the blind harpist that gave the tomb one of its alternative names, Tomb of the Harpers. In the chamber beyond is an aborted tunnel where ancient builders ran into the neighboring tomb. They shifted the axis of the tomb to the west and built a corridor leading to a pillared hall with walls decorated with scenes from the Book of Gates. There is also ancient graffiti on the rear right pillar describing the reburial of the pharaoh during the 21st dynasty. The remainder of the tomb is only partially excavated and structurally weak. At the southern end of the Theban hillside, the Valley of the Queens contains at least 75 tombs that belong to the queens of the 19th and 20th dynasties as well as to other members of the royal families, including princesses. 4 of the tombs are open for viewing. The most famous of these, the tomb of Nefertari, was only reopened to the public in late 2016.
It's like 7 days a week, especially to put candle, tea light, look under the light. Wow! Oh my God! That's cool.
These are accepted principles of how ancient Egyptian visual art was created and interpreted. In origin, writing was in vertical columns and pictures were horizontal. The hieroglyphic captions give you information that is not so easily put in a picture. More often, these scenes don't represent actual events but a general and ideal representation of life. This is the local market in Luxor near the tombs of Hardship Queen.
Looks like crystal. We have three different colors. So first color,
White,
second color,
brown,
third color,
green.
We bring alabaster stones behind those hills, behind the mountain, by donkey and camel. We get it a big stone like this. And here, our artists cut the stone by the hammer. Give a stone a shape, make like vase,
Bowl,
bowl,
ashtray,
ashtray,
statue,
any,
pot,
thank
you,
I
love you.
Second step, we cover it by putting material and the glue, make like a protect, because when we make hole, no cracks happen. How we make a hole like this?
One of the most striking features of ancient Egyptian visual art, the depiction of people, animals, and objects on a flat two-dimensional plane. Why did the ancient Egyptians do this? Is ancient Egypt the only culture to create art in this style? When drawing on a flat surface, the outline becomes the most important feature. Even though many Egyptian drawings and paintings include details from several sides of the object, there is also a great focus on clarity and comprehensibility.